Welcome back, everybody, for the Sacred Self-Healing training called Dimensions of Self. I'm super happy to see you all come back. It was a very, very lively discussion last time, and I want to thank you again for sharing. Every time you share something, it allows us to relate the sometimes somewhat dry material here into a more practical example. And the reason why this is so difficult to communicate these dimensions of self and these fundamentals of self-awareness and self-discovery that we discussed here for an hour and a half already is because these processes of perception, how we perceive ourselves, and with it the states of being, the different states of being, and how this determines our identity, our self-image, and how our consciousness forms, and with it also our empathy, are not really sort of written down as a systematic curriculum of something that we would call science. All right, there is a lot of material out there, and we know this, the philosophers and the mathematicians and the psychologists brought in a lot of material, as well as ancient scripture and religious scripture. So there's a lot of material that we have here in the 21st century, but not quite yet something that we could follow, like a pathway, one that allows every person who goes through this kind of training to come to the same level of self-awareness and discovery. And this is sort of my feeble attempt here to show systematic ways. And this requires us to form a terminology, that requires us to form vocabulary that we can use to communicate things. And anyone who has studied philosophy or linguistics understands that there's a huge connection between the way we can express things and our awareness level about what is going on internally. So if you will, what we are learning here is really the science of the human nature, how we work from the inside using all different kinds of science in combination, meta science, if you will, to understand ourselves better in these different dimensions, not just on a physical level, not just on an emotional or cognitive level, not just on a spiritual level, not even just on an etheric level, but as a whole, how perceptions are formed, how opinions are formed, and how decisions are made. This is really what this self-discovery is about, and that's why we hear about self-discovery usually in conjunction with self-mastery. So self-mastery is a process where we can make conscious decisions and choose who we want to show up with, whom we want to experience life as, through whose eyes we want to see the world. Yeah, and it's a very complex subject, so I'm really glad that you all came back to contribute and more. So I'm unmuting your microphones just to let you know that your sharing is not just valuable, but it's really instrumental here for this kind of learning, right? So there's a statement that I want to start part 2 with: perceiving is believing. And that's not actually how we say this in our colloquial English, all right? We have other things that we use. We say seeing is believing. Who's familiar with this? Seeing is believing, right? Yeah, and what does this mean? What does seeing is believing means? Does anybody want to speak? What does it mean to you? Seeing is believing. seeing makes it real. Okay, I like how you say that, Heather. Yeah, so this is, yeah, go ahead if you want to share. Yeah, what we can perceive through our five senses, right? That is something that we, well, you know, value as more real. Yeah, Justine is chiming in. Yeah, eye perception really only. So, I mean, yeah, I think sort of in this proverbial sense, it means, you know, things that are sort of this 3D world. Okay, so seeing is believing. I think, yes, the physical perspective show. Yeah, that's how I see it too. Yeah, Becky, I can only believe in what I can prove. No, come back, Julian. It's fine. It's just that I wanted to get all these different perspectives here. Did you want to add something to this, Julian? Okay. Yeah, and here you see a different variation of this, and it says perceiving is believing. Well, what do you think I mean with that? Perceiving is believing. Is perceiving the same as, well, seeing in the sense that we just defined it, something in the physical, something that we can perceive through our five senses, something that is real? Well, yeah, Janet, exactly. This is Janet is sharing perceiving is just a perception then, and she's asking for a distinction. Yeah, yeah. So look, we all understand different things with perceiving. Janet is sharing perceiving is at least a connection. So the way this is defined is through the perceiving or perception process. And I mentioned this in the beginning. Yeah, Sheila, you're right. Yeah, so let's go just revisit the perception process here real quick. Perception is how we make sense of things, how we interpret our world, how we make judgments about things. Okay, and it allows us to come up with a frame of reference. But we've already learned that, you know, whatever the frame of the individual frame of reference is, then also plays back into the perception. So our frame of reference influences how we perceive things. And how we perceive things influences our frame of reference. Can you see what the problem with this is? Perceiving is believing really just means that when we perceive something and it matches up with our frame of reference, well, then we believe it to be real. But you guys already know more. Is believing the same as knowing? Is something being real the same as something being true? Hang on, Sheila. I don't know if you're saying something. Your mic is open, but I'm not hearing you. Let me double
Can you
check on
hear
my
me now?
settings here. Yes, I can hear you now. There you go.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know if you said anything before.
No, I think it was me. I was trying to hook something up. To me, that's where we can get caught in the looping part. If I perceive something and believe it to be true, and then I reinforce that with more perceiving of it from my own perspective, then I continue to believe that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking of with that part.
You know what this also reminds me of, Sheila, and I know that you personally have a lot of experiences like that. When you then surround yourself or socialize with people who have the same beliefs as you, they're going to start perceiving the same thing, and you're going to start believing the same thing. It's sort of like a confirmation bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you see everything through a certain set of eyes, or certain blinds, or certain, not blinds, so certain colored glasses, right? And then everything you see is confirmed. And if you have other people who confirm this, then you feel a little more secure about it. So this is why seeing is believing is, typically just sort of taken as a truth, okay? Because everybody kind of acts that way. But here in this self-discovery and consciousness work environment, we already know that that's not necessarily true. So what, and this is really the important part here that you just talked about, what really matters is the frame of reference, right? Because the frame of reference, if the frame of reference determines the way I perceive, and the way I perceive determines the way I believe, which then determines my perception again, that means the one variable is the frame of reference. And the frame of reference is like all these things such as morals and values and ethics and integrity. And we would also add alignment to that. That determines how a person sees things, and that determines how they interpret things, how they make sense of the world, of themselves. That's very important to understand. It determines what the person expects. It determines norms and morals, and it's so many things that come with this. And nowadays we can see problems with this whenever something changes in science, for instance, right? I remember times 30, 40 years ago in nutrition when there was this belief that carbs are bad, right? And then you're not supposed to eat any carbs, okay? And then they change it and say, well, no, 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 hang on. Carbs are actually good. Your brain needs carbs, and fats are bad. Okay. And then everything shifts to like seeing foods that are fat in them as bad. And then they revise it again and say, well, wait a minute, no, we've got to differentiate here. There's good fats and bad fats. That is good carbs and bad carbs. And you guys understand what I'm talking about, right? So there's a bit of a problem with the frame of reference if we don't form our own frame of reference, if we are not sure what that actually is. And this is why we have all these conflicts in the world. This is why we have all these fights, and there's other reasons for that as well. But for the most part, even if you reduce it down to one of the simplest conflicts that we have in the world between religions, okay, it's really a fight or war of beliefs, okay? And from each individual's perspective, it's completely and 100% real, okay? And there's absolutely no way this can change for the person, because their whole entire frame of reference builds on it, and they perceive things that way. Yes, Janet, exactly. It's really important to remember that the frame of reference, it forms the determining dimension of how we perceive things, but that it can also change. Yes, and Shell, you throwing in another component here, the difference between external information and internal, or inner truth, as you call it. So the external way of learning and the internal way of learning, and that's really what all this training here comes down to. It's a systematic way of learning how to internalize information and form our own frame of reference, and with it, choose the perspective, and with it, the perception that we want to have, and not just blindly follow certain sets of beliefs or values that we were programmed with. Yeah, you're right, Cheryl. It's not one versus the other. There's a duality in us about this. And the truth is, we do learn through external experiences, especially in our childhood. And then our experiences become more and more internalized, and then we can verify our inner value system, our inner compass, as I like calling it. Yeah. So if this is what perception is, okay, so it is the way I experience reality. It measures how reality affects me. Okay, it's determined by my ability to observe the phenomena. So that would be, determined by how well I can be in the present moment. It is determined by how self-aware I am. Because when we do the self-awareness and internalization training, what we find out is that we actually sometimes also have blocks or blinds. All right. And knowing that can help us to see things in a more differentiated way. Is also the frame of reference that we use to judge what we experience. It's the willingness to look at a phenomenon from a different point of view. Okay, so here we're getting into the more advanced level of perception. It is linked to the empathy to witness a different perspective. Okay, and it is determined by the conscious level to contextualize what I'm witnessing. So obviously there's a little bit of a hierarchy here, and this is just a repeat from our first part, but we can see this with slightly different eyes now because we talked so much about this. All right, so you can see that it really depends on the level of consciousness someone has. Okay, and that then also helps us to understand why it sometimes makes no sense to argue with people, especially not about opinion. Because what are opinions, guys? What are opinions?
They're basically self-perceptions, each person's own perception and what they perceive as their reality.
Mm-hmm. And an opinion is a little stronger, say, than a perception. It's more polarized in a way that it becomes a little static. But the main factor, what turns a perception into an opinion is the person's internal sympathy or antipathy towards what they perceive. So the like or dislike. All right. So you form an opinion about things that correlates with whether you like something or not. But again, here we see the subjectivity of it, right? Because whether we like something or not can depend on other things as well. What for most people, what determines what they like is what they know the best. Did you guys know that? We have a tendency to like what we know better than something that we don't know. How could we know, right? So yeah, you see, this is an endless loop here. And you're right, Heather. The opinions include judgments, and these judgments, they come, ultimately from our likes and dislikes. All right, they come from past experiences, really, because whether it's a football team or a political party or a religious belief, I mean, the number one determinant for if we like something or not has to do with knowing it, okay, being familiar with it, okay. But the second one is really like how much we have been sort of perceiving through that filter, because then it forms sort of a database in us that keeps reconfirming itself, and it becomes so real for us that we begin to become unopen for other things, or for different options, for different viewpoints, for different perspectives. So in the most neutral sense, opinion is a formed sort of statement about likes and dislikes. In the more extreme or intense form, an opinion can become something that wrongs others, that vilifies others. So if you're not on my team, or if you're not for me, you got to be against me. If you don't like this, then it must mean you hate this. If you don't like me, it must mean you reject me. Okay, so these are all things that come through this perception processing in us, all right, and can lead, as you can tell already, to a lot of misunderstandings, to a lot of assumptions, to a lot of false beliefs and limitations, and it can really limit the way we see ourselves and the world. So we left off in part one with this statement here, and our discussion ended here, you know, with we're not defined or restrained by our potential, but by the choices we make. So bringing this back here to our discussion right now, well, if the choices that we make are determined by our opinions, by our perception, by our frame of reference, well, how do I then even know what my potential is? Okay. And what are some other things that play into me seeing, me seeing my own potential? This is now more the subjective version of what do I see as potential and how does this form in me? I'll make an example for you because this is a question for you here. When a child is told, oh, you would become a wonderful doctor. I can totally see you how you can be a doctor. Okay. And this happens over a certain period of time. What do you guys believe happens to that child as it grows up?
Jona, I remember also like how impactful those words are as kids, and I remember as a parent making sure I stood back and watched after so much good energy training the impact one person can have on the other. Like I was told kind of the opposite. I was going to become a doctor, although I had made the decision. I couldn't imagine myself with books for another 8 to 10 years. It seemed impossible. But I remember my mom telling me, well, you know, if you become a veterinarian, you're going to have to kill animals. And at that point, that moment, I decided not to become a veterinarian in my life. So like, whether it's positive or negative, the impact that it can have is so, it's just like,
yeah,
oh,
there's so
it's
many dimensions to that.
unbelievable.
It is. It is. You know, there's another thing that this, I mean, obviously, you know, to a degree, we were all told things about ourselves, what our potential is and what not. I mean, people can also have the programming where they're being told, oh, that's not for you. You know, don't even try that. That's not for you. It's even more damaging. Okay. But even sort of what is supposed to sound like a pep talk can be very damaging if it limits the child's perspective, and with it then the perception, because it would always be compared with what sort of this frame of reference is. Okay.
Yeah, the limitations of it, you know, there's like, I mean, at that point as a child, it's comfortable because it's within the you know, like it's within the family and it feels like it's in the right place. And it is a bit shocking because even as you mentioned it now, it's practically like I'm standing in the position right now.
Yeah.
It's so and we don't know how limiting it is at that point or how limited we already are.
No, but this is why we're
So
talking about it
phenomenal.
right now, to find out
Yeah.
what our limits are or what these limitations and these blocks are, not to point fingers or to find someone to blame, but to understand how
No.
our
Yeah.
perception of ourselves is so skewed through these little things here and there. Cheryl is chiming in. She says it makes the child feel like choosing anything, quote unquote, less than becoming a doctor would then be perceived as failure. Absolutely. Yeah. Because there's something transported with it, right? I mean, you guys are all energetically sensitive. Most of you are trained. You can even hear the cringe or feel the cringe in yourself with those statements. Okay, when somebody tells you what you are or who you should be. just on a side note here, this is one of the biggest problems that I see within the whole healing business environment, you know, especially with the fortune tellers, mediums, and so forth. This is something that I can teach you right here on the spot as a big sort of discernment tool. If somebody says to you, like a card reader or a reader or medium or energy worker or whatever, oh, you should be a healer, or you should be this, or you should do this, then that's a limitation. You have been told to be something. You have been given an identity from the outside. And this is very, very damaging for a person. I just want you guys to have that little tool in your toolbox. Okay? This is not responsible, neither ethical. And even though the ego feels stroked in that moment, right? It's very limiting for the person. Okay? Because it's maybe even meant well, okay, but by predetermining somebody's perception of self, we are, and this is human, okay, we are beginning to see ourselves through a specific set of glasses. And that is when I talk about this choice to choose whom you experience life as, you know, who you want to show up as, you know, who you want to be. That's the number one rule that cannot be violated. You have to pick the glasses. You have to pick your perspective. You have to pick the way you want to perceive yourself. And any attempt from the outside to change that or influence or manipulate that is ultimately an attack on your sense of self. Okay? Even if it's well meant. Very, very important, guys, for us parents and grandparents. All right, we mean well when we say these things to our children and grandchildren, but it has a long-term effect on their perception. So best not to say anything like that, and always to refer it back to themselves. How do you see yourself? What do you feel attracted to? What can you imagine? You know, so to increase the imagination, to increase the field of possibilities and not to limit it. So how do you then know that you are here right now in this present moment, what your potential is, or what it is not? Anything that comes to mind here, that comes to your awareness, what would you say? How do you know what your potential is?
Only because I can only speak from right now and today's experiences, that unless I was in the moment and these last 3 days, I was feeling nauseated and heavy, but as soon as I could pull myself really further into the moment, because then only at that point could I function or have a possibility, then that's the only time to know what my potential is. Today, my quote for making a t-shirt, my t-shirt quote today was, I love it when I agree with myself.
Yeah, that's also called confirmation bias.
Yeah, I mean,
The ego loves that.
I
Yeah.
suddenly felt happy after all of today going, oh my goodness, what's going on or whatever, just get present. And that was like a nice little bright star. So yeah, my little ego boost.
Yeah. But that's also part of our limitation, though, Janet. We got to be careful with that because our ego has that bias. It likes everything it knows. It likes everything it agrees with. It likes everything that it likes. Yeah. It dislikes everything it doesn't know. It dislikes everything. Well, ultimately, it dislikes everything it cannot control or everything that is uncertain. And we all know here that we all, as humans, have to live with the biggest dualities of all, namely living in a mortal body with an immortal soul, and having been bestowed with the awareness of consciousness, and yet knowing that this vehicle, this body, will die one day. This is the biggest duality in us, the biggest dislike we have, and therefore also one of the most limiting factors for our perception. We dislike everything we don't know. The greatest fear is the fear of the unknown, the fear of the future, and therefore also the greatest limitation for us as humans, for our perception, for our self-awareness, for our consciousness. And when we think of potential, then we are obviously thinking about something in the future, but something in the future is uncertain, okay? And so the ego immediately gets into a crisis when we think of the future and tries to control that, okay? And tries to basically infiltrate its own bias to it. And that's where we all have a bit of a problem, because that bias, that frame of reference, is often not aware to us. The only times where we can see the faultiness of this, the error perception in that, is when we witness how the world looks like to us, or other people, or our relationship, or how we feel about ourselves in a moment of excellence, in a moment where we're happy and where we're fulfilled, and where we are looking at a beautiful sunset, and everything is just so perfect, the way it is, and life is easy and it's all good, and 5 seconds later something happens and our energy drops into a place of dislike, into a place of inner confliction, and suddenly we see everything is pessimistic, we see other people as hostile, we judge ourselves, and we feel regrets, we feel resentments, we feel guilty perhaps, and all of a sudden life becomes hard. Now you tell me, which of these two perceptions is true? Both are obviously real, but which one is true?
Well, I'm not sure how that happened. So is there any such thing as a perception that is true?
Well, that would depend on whom. Who can determine if a perception is true or not?
Would it not just be self?
Yeah. It can only be you. And not because, we all have our own truths, although we do. But when we train this, we got to learn that there's a difference between what's real and what's true. Because everything we perceive through our senses, right? Through this seeing that we discussed earlier, feels very real, right? I mean, this, Justine. I mean, there is like absolutely no doubt, when, sort of when we're in a state of like a series of unfortunate events, that life is hard. There's absolutely no doubt in our mind that this is real. Right? And just because I'm making this distinction here, I'm not saying that it's all unreal. We just had a training last weekend about delusions and how they're determined. There's clear determinants for this, but the point is that whether or not something is true needs to be determined from within ourselves. And in order to do this, we need to have some kind of compass or some kind of sensation or feeling or perception, undifferentiated, that informs us of that. And that is really, if you will, if you contextualize perception with consciousness here, how we can change our reality. Okay, if we allow ourselves to see our version of reality, okay, and we allow other people to see their version of reality, but only determine things that are true based on our own inner truth compass. And a lot of times, this is the key to changing things, to changing our conditions, inner or outer conditions, is to recognize that the perception, the way we make sense of things, okay, that's often the most limiting factor. And of course, the frame of reference and the fears and the dislikes and everything behind that. That's why in coaching, success coaching, as well as energy coaching, we address the blocks and the error perceptions. Because for most people, 99% of people do not have a lack of potential or a lack of choices. They have a lack of true perception. So it's not about acquiring something or seeking something or finding something or getting something or getting better at something. No, it's about letting go of something, letting go of whatever the error perception is that limits us in seeing things the way they are. So when we talk about seeing things the way they are, then we are referring to a certain level of neutrality with it, where we are willing to step into truth, whether we like it or not. We can completely disagree with what we're seeing, and we can feel the cringe inside, and our ego can rebel, and everybody else can say, oh no, so it can be confirmed. But there's something inside us that tells us, no, wait a minute, that's not true. Okay, this neutrality, to let go of all, what other people say, what my frame of reference is, what I like and dislike, to let go of all of that and to stand in the middle. And the other key in order to get into this place is the present moment awareness, like Janet shared with us. We have to know how to put ourselves into that place where we let go of all these things, take a deep breath, all right, and kind of reset our perception. And say, okay, let me just look at it for what it is. No opinions, no assumptions, no expectations, none of these other things. What am I truly seeing? What am I truly perceiving? We are all capable of that, and we all have the ability to discern truth. But if that sense, I often call it the eighth sense, if that is not trained, then it basically dystrophies. So we have no way of telling truth because we are so caught in our error perceptions. So this is what this whole truth training is about, okay? To allow ourselves to see our version of reality, because as soon as we allow ourselves to see it that way and don't judge it and don't filter it anymore, and we allow other people to see it their way, well, then we are clearing all the stuff out of the way that limits our potential, that limits our perception. So if we want to change the way things are in our life, we need to change the way we see ourselves. And if we want to change the way we see ourselves, we have to first embrace the fact that what we're seeing might not go along with how we like it. And that we have to let go of our likes and dislikes, our opinions about it. Ultimately, guys, and when I talk about error perceptions, these are formed in our lifetime through memories and narratives. The way we perceive things, especially the way we perceive ourselves, is basically a culmination of narratives. And out of that forms our story. And our story is really, composed of all the things that other people told us, how we are, how we should be, what we told ourselves, how we could have been, what we're not. Okay. And truth training means to consciously train to let go of all these filters of perception, these narratives, so that we can actually see things for what they truly are. And then we can still make our choices. We can still choose. I can say, okay, this is the way it is. It sucks. I hate it, but it is the way it is. And if I look at it from that perspective, then the only choice that really makes sense, that is healthy, that is conducive for me, that makes me grow, is this and this. But I can also choose, oh, I see it the way it is. It sucks. I really don't like it. I know, that it would be better if I did this or this or that. But I choose to, do this regardless, because it makes me feel better for the next 5 minutes. It helps me cope, and then I deal with it later. So there's a narrative here, if you pay attention, that basically procrastinates the true choice. And if we do this too often and too long, we lose the connection to who we truly are and how to truly see ourselves and our options. And that then determines our potential. So our potential is basically, all the different options we have, or we think we have. Okay, but continuing here in this systematic learning, we have to also realize that if our perception can be skewed, if the choices that we see can be skewed, well, what about our motivation then? So motivation is an energy we use or can use to grow. Motivation drives us, okay? It's a driving force, okay? It is determined by the way I perceive myself and the world, okay? If conscious, it reflects my values, morals, and integrity in an authentic and congruent way. If unconscious, it reflects my belief and opinions and therefore limits me. Unconscious motivation that blocks my perception is the #1 reason for when I cannot feel my own potential. Let me ask you guys, who of you can feel your own potential? And potential often also links in with purpose. Who of you has a very clear understanding, feeling, however it comes to you, of what your potential is? That's limited to this lifetime. Yeah, that's not many. It's one person. Okay. What does this mean? And it's very accurate, actually. That it's very honest that you see it that way, because if you've never actually done this investigation and self-discovery process in a conscious way, you cannot be sure. Yeah, and Cheryl's adding here now, and this is for the first time, and that you feel you have a potential. The details aren't clear, but That's, Cheryl, you want to share real quick? That's what it can feel like when we know our potential. We might not know exactly how to get there. Like you said, you might not know the details yet. But there's an inner knowing.
When you were talking earlier about, do you want to be a ballerina, your potential to be whatever when you grow up, and I was going, I got no memory of that whatsoever. No, I was just existing. I know that. And so it has taken a long time to even, words are hard right now. It has taken a long time to even be more than a shell, if that makes sense. And then to be able to feel my entire essence in all facets. So it is just a very fresh and new feeling, like within the last few months, that I know why I'm here. I know my potential. I don't have a map or a picture or anything of what it's growing into, but I'm learning to just, and this does not mean don't be part of it. That's not what I mean, but I'm just keeping out of the way and let it unfold. But I do understand that there has to be action as well. I get that.
I was
But
just going to ask you, how does that affect your choices now, or the options that you think,
I can
you see you
see.
have?
Well, I see I have a million options. I feel like I'm a. Have you ever watched a foal or a doe, or I mean a baby deer, get up off of the ground for the first time? Like when they're first newborn? I feel like that. I don't like, I know, like I can
Mhm.
gallop, but I'm very fresh, I think, and
The
I'm,
world feels bigger, right? And your
yeah,
options
yeah,
feel bigger. You feel freer. There's a form of freedom with
yeah.
it as well, and
And I
curiosity and
know
openness.
why I'm here. I
Hmm.
know why I'm here. And I get that. I totally get that. I'm just not at a place that the form is here yet. And
No.
I, without being passive, because I can understand these words could be interpreted that way, I also understand that I will be pulled to the future as long as I'm not resistant, but I also know that the manifestation means it application as well. You can't just sit back on the tide
Right.
and wait that it takes you to the right island. It doesn't work that way.
And
So
and
it's
that
all,
manifestation, yeah, that manifestation process is then basically what is expressed through a motivation. Okay. So make this a conscious thought here for a second. How does this knowing that you describe of your own potential, how does that affect your motivation?
it's very exciting and terrifying at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense.
But
Like
is
like
that
now
something that
there's
you can
the,
congruently, according to this definition here, that you can authentically and congruently use to grow?
yes, because why would I deny it?
Yeah.
Why would I deny it? That's why I'm here. This brings tears just thinking about it. Why would I deny it? Other than fear, right? And the fear is, well, what if it can't be all of it? But that's bullshit,
But
because
that's
I
questioning
wouldn't.
the potential again. Hmm.
Exactly. I wouldn't be here if I was only less than it. Like that makes no sense whatsoever. So really sitting at the cusp of knowing it all and being really human at the same time.
Well,
Like I can feel this purpose and I'm like, oh, so yeah.
but it's wonderful that you just used the word being human, because that's how this is really defined. Okay, so being human means accepting that there are different versions of reality. Okay, being empathetic means to be able to feel it from, or to see things from a different perspective, and therefore sort of verify for yourself that, yeah, if I look at it from that perspective, it feels real. If I look at it from that perspective, it also feels real. Okay, but then to find the middle ground, okay, to find sort of this place within our center, okay, that realizes sort of the truth in it all, okay, and that we can then use to motivate ourselves. We can use this to drive ourselves past some of the limitations that we sometimes perceive. Because really, all it takes is like a day where your body feels weak, or where you feel sick or whatever, and then all of a sudden, all these expansive options, well, they restrict again, right? We all know this, right? When we start feeling a little bad, or something bad happens, or we lost something, or we were in a crisis, or somehow all of a sudden our potential seems to become more restricted, right? And knowing truth means, to understand what truly drives us, what truly motivates us, and to go into this center of our center and pull up that drive, that motivation energy, okay, that taps us back into our highest potential, so that we can, let go of all the restrictions and the filters and the temporary errors of perception. Okay, so the truth is that there really always exists this highest potential. Okay, it always exists. It's just that due to the limitation of our perception, untrained perception, we cannot always see it. That's where this proverb comes from. The sun is always there, even if it's even on a cloudy day or at nighttime. Okay, and that's something that we take as a truth. We take as a truth that the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, and even if we can't see the sun, we still know it's there. We still know it's truth. And how do we know this? Partially through experience, partially through education, and like literally through us believing that the sun is going to come back up. It feels true, all right, that it comes back up. So on a
it goes
cloudy
back
day,
to
we
how
have to
you,
remind ourselves that the sun is still there. It's cloudy right now, but it's
yeah,
still.
just had a couple cloudy days last week.
Yep.
Totally remember how quickly not it slips away. That's really not what happens. How quickly I pretend I can't connect. But anyway, I was going to say, like how you introduced this talk today was about perception, right? Because I've always eaten red apples, so I didn't know that green ones were delicious, but I decided that they weren't, or whatever it is. And so when we talk about the motivation to be all that I am, it's the mind has got perceptions about the green and red apples, or an office space, or whatever, whatever conscious stuff comes in there as a frame of reference of what it was like in the past about anything,
The past always comes
anything.
in. It always plays in.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
again,
yeah.
it's part of being
Here,
human. And the
yeah, and
emotion, the likes and dislikes, they always come in. Yeah.
yeah,
We have to learn to filter them. We have to learn to
yeah,
allow them. Okay. So I can look at something and I can say, okay, I'm seeing this and this. And it really sucks. I really don't like it. But that doesn't mean it's not there. Okay. It just means I really don't want to be here. I really don't want to see it, but it is still there. Okay, so that would be the other side of the coin, to filter this out and say, okay, just because I'm rejecting it or I'm resisting it, okay, it doesn't make it less true. Okay, so we have to find out when our own energy, our own system goes into this restricted mode, when we, in energy awareness, you guys have learned this, when we feel this constriction inside of us, that is an indication here that our perception is getting limited. And when we feel expansive, okay, when we feel, oh, things are just opened up, and it comes with allowing, and it comes with neutrality, okay, then we know that we are at least more in truth. Okay, so that's how we can personally integrate this into our journey here. And integration then becomes literally just the adaptation of our frame of reference, of our perception. So that's why we talk so much about perception here in context with consciousness development and self-discovery, because it's a core piece of that. All right, it's the adaptation of our frame of reference. In other words, or simple words, the seeing the larger perspective, you know, even if whatever it is that we perceive as real constricts our perspective, but still recognizing that there is a larger perspective, and this conscious adaptation from constricted into unrestricted or expansive, that is what we call integration. And that you're absolutely right here, Shell, has to be followed through with, well, you know, actions, choices, decisions. Okay, this cannot just be a cognitive process. The body is involved, our emotions are involved, our thoughts are involved, and our spiritual beliefs are involved, and it's totally okay. We can allow them all to be there, you know, later than also our energetic perception, and still feel, you know, this sort of, still have this like really clear, piercing sense for truth, discernment of truth. Yeah, this is what this is all about here, this training. Okay, so the part here that I would like you to shift your focus to right now is, you know, if all that is so, okay, well, how can I then know what drives me? I mean, if motivation is an energy form, yeah, something that I can use to grow, to expand, to see the larger perspective, to integrate a larger, higher potential, okay, well, how do I know what I have been motivated by, what has driven me in the past? What are your insights on that? What have you found out going a little deeper into looking at what has driven you in the past? Do you guys know what has driven you for the perhaps majority of your life? Okay. Fear. Yeah, fear. Fear seems to be a very popular drive. Fear of what, guys? Seeking. Yeah. Survival. All right, let's take those. Expectations of others. Pleasing. Yep. Expression. Yeah, the fear of expressing yourself. Just showing the fear of living. Yeah, let's investigate fear a little bit here, just because it's something that indeed actually drives a lot of people. And ultimately, it's always a fear, guys. It's the fear of expressing something. It's the fear of what's survival. It's the fear of dying, right? Or paying our bills, or not being able to pay our bills. Or what is seeking? You know, seeking is the fear of having missed something, of not seeing something. You know, it's a fear of losing something or not finding something. What is this fear really determined by? You guys mentioned one thing already, the past, right? I guess we can all agree. Yes, exactly, Julian. Incidences in the past. So there's something in the past that happened. And what about it? What about those past
Hi, Jona.
things that happened? Yeah. Hi, Julian.
It's more like from the incidents of the past, well, what happened and what the outcomes were is all that was known. Like for me, is all that was known. So everything based on the past is like, oh yeah, well, that's how it's going to pan out. That's how it's going to happen. So my
What's so
ego
bad
mind
about
can only.
it? What's so bad about it?
what's so bad about it is that it was always based on survival and struggle and
struggle. Okay, something negative in the past.
yeah.
Something painful.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is all my ego mind knows. So everything it looks at from that perception, everything that I'm seeing, if I'm going to do something, will be based on that past experience, rather than seeing, well, hang on a minute, I can be open to something different coming. It's like, as soon as I can let that go, let that fear go, and go, you know what? Let's just try it. Let's just do this.
Yeah, thank you. You just demonstrated integration for us. But you see, we run into a bunch of issues with the past. On one hand, we have the fear of something repeating, right? Exactly, Sheila. Whether it's a conscious choice that we made or a choice that we made, we're afraid of making mistakes or repeating the mistakes of the past. But ultimately, you can all boil it down to negative experiences. Something that we judged as negative, something that we experienced traumatic. And I don't know the exact statistics, but it ranges somewhere in the 90%. We are driven somewhere around 90% by the pain of the past, by things that we experienced as painful in some ways. Now, if I was a biologist, I'd say, well, that's normal. That's part of being human because our nervous system is designed this way. We are supposed to learn through pain. We are supposed to grow through the things that we should avoid, right? That's correct. You would all agree with this, right? The problem only is that really all that delivers is what we can't do, what we don't do, what we don't like, what is painful, what we're not. It doesn't actually help us to see what we are, what's good for us. So we have a bit of a problem here with the drive if it stays unreflected. If it stays unreflected, we will inevitably develop a life strategy that is avoidant. 90 or some percent of our drive is determined by avoidance. Trying to avoid some kind of negative feeling that we had in the past. And the farther back it lies, so the earlier it happened in our life, the stronger the drive and the more unconscious the drive, which is ultimately the cause for all error perceptions. Because if I have something, a core programming sitting here, let's say as an example, someone who grows up in really, really poor circumstances from early childhood on will experience a lot of pain, a lot of loss around this, a lot of tension, a lot of stress, maybe the parents constantly fighting over money. There's constant fear about this, and it will literally determine this person's life. What would you say how that determines a person's drive? Yes, Julian, you're right. It will only energize that perspective. In what way? This person will do one out of two things. What do you think these two things are, these two options that the person sees? If it's unreflected, we're talking about unconscious drive. Well, the first we've already mentioned.
Nothing is really coming from truth then from the heart. It's coming from an illusionary belief that things are based on fear or pain or
Well, it's
struggle.
not an
And
illusionary belief. That is actually pretty real.
yes,
Okay, it is
it
pretty real. I
is.
mean, yeah,
Yeah,
you know this. You know, this is a core belief. Okay, that life
yeah,
is a struggle, and that it's really painful to not being able to meet life's needs. Okay, no meets. What's the English saying? I can't get this together right now. I'm not in the right state. To just not being able to pay the bill, to not being able to survive. This is real. Okay, so it's not an error perception. What happened in the past, it happened in the past, and there is a memory of that in us. Okay, we can't deny that. But do we really want our past to determine our future? What are the two most probable things that the most probable options this person sees or drives that this person will develop? Yeah, this person will either try to push to the extreme and become rich, right? Isn't that the best way to avoid that painful feeling of not having money? Is to make this the purpose in life, to become rich, money, to orient, to make everything motivated by how much money I can make. Why? Because there is a perceived promise that if I don't feel this negative feeling, if I don't have to feel the pain, then I should be happy. What do you guys know about people who are like this, who let themselves drive by that? Do you know people like this? And there are some more examples that you guys make in here. This is the avoidant version, is trying to avoid the pain of the past. Okay, and then basically choosing the opposite. Okay, like Becky trying to prove that someone has the right to be here. How would that play out in a person's life if that was the pain? If the pain was, sort of insignificant and having to be invisible and not really being seen and not really being heard, what does that do to the person? On one side, there's another side to it, but one was one of the options. Well, to be super successful, to be a really really good performer, to be seen, to be on the top of something, to be perfect, and then I will be seen, and then I have the right to exist. Similar with not wanting to repeat a mistake. Okay, the fear of making mistakes. What would this person who has had some kind of painful experience about having made a mistake, maybe having been punished for spilling the milk, okay, or having been punished for saying something that the parents didn't like, or similar. What will this person, as the sort of the avoidant version of life's purpose, do? They'll try to only make perfect decisions. They constantly seek for the perfect solution, and they will get pulled into controlling everything so that it is perfect. They have to, because otherwise they would re-experience the pain of the past. Yes, and that, of course, then reconfirms, it energizes this perspective. Yeah. And yes, you're right. It also restricts other possibilities. We're not even looking at other possibilities. It's just not important to us. What drives us is to avoid that pain. So we are completely focused on that only, and we are completely unaware of it. Yeah, there is no such thing as as highest potential, there's only one option, and that is the avoidance of that pain. Yes, and you guys are sharing here in regards to knowing those people. Maybe we are those kind of people ourselves. That does not make people happy. Yeah, it actually recreates, it perpetuates the pain, because as you probably already know, by trying to avoid something, okay, by trying to focus on something not to happen, well, we are energizing it. Yeah, so that's at the core of lack or greed. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, there's never enough to satisfy what they're trying to fill. Exactly. And if you will, it actually kind of sets the person up for failure. Can you see that? There is no way to fulfill that. So by this, driven by this unconscious motivation, we will never feel that this fear of this pain goes away, because we never actually integrated that pain. We've just tried to avoid it. So what's the other side of the coin now? What's the, yes, disappointment, exactly. Unrealistic expectations. But what's the other side of that? Okay, so not everybody chooses to go sort of become a goal-getter and, you know, become the best or the loudest or get the most attention or, you know, the richest or the most beautiful. Not everybody does that. There's the other, you know, half of people that choose. You probably guessed at the opposite. What's the opposite? Guilt, shame, depression, yeah. But what's the perception behind that? What's the motivation behind that? Or the belief behind that? I'm never going to reach it. I don't even need to try. No matter what I try, it doesn't work out. I better stay in the background. Exactly. I better hide. Why bother? Exactly. And, you know this kind of talk. There's also then, you know, sort of the need to vilify it all and to make it bad. Okay, so it's not good anyway. It's not good to be materialistic, and humans are all bad anyway, and there's dark forces out there, and there's nothing we can do against this sort of this form of passivity and pessimism. Yeah, and karma can play into that. Well, oh yeah, it's just not my karma, or you know, it's just not supposed to be. You know, these are all variations of the theme. I want to show you guys that you are driven by something that is so determining for everything that you perceive that you're not even aware of. So if you take this from this talk here, from this training, and integrate that, it will change everything in your life. It will change your perception, the way you perceive things, the way you interpret things. It will change your perspective. It will allow you to see the greater perspective, the more potential. It will change the way you see yourself. It will change the way you see your options and your potential. And it will change your choices. Why? Because self-discovery leads to self-healing, and self-healing ultimately leads to self-mastery. Okay, self-healing is the part where you integrate and where you see this. Oh my God, this is so true. All I was driven by on the deepest core of myself and how I saw myself had to do with pain, with a pain in the past. Now, some of it does come from karmic components or things that we call things or aspects, energetic aspects. that come from a past life or, before we were born. And this can entail things such as family karma, okay, collective karma, obviously, but also our personal karma. Something that was unresolved that kind of rolls over into the next dimension. So karma can also come from other dimensions, guys. This is something that most people can't see. They can only contextualize this as a past life, but it can also be a life in a different dimension. And people like myself who have etheric vision, we can see karma play out in the etheric in the now. Okay, so I can see there, sort of what the karmic attachment is, and I can see that this is still there. Okay, because the person's etheric body still does it. Okay, so or still engages in it. Okay, so it's not always just that simple to refer back to past lives. But that's also the reason why we can heal this in the etheric, okay? And that can then basically heal our past. It won't make events undone, but it can change our energetic attachment to the events in the past. We can undo those, and with it then, obviously, our perception, our perspectives, and our choices. And with that then, ultimately, our ability to manifest what it is that we choose to be. Our freedom, our truth, our love in this life. So this is really profound, very, very fundamental stuff, guys. So when I announced this webinar, I was aware that it's extremely complex, and I want to thank you for hanging in there, because there's many parts of this are kind of mental, but it is required for us to build this vocabulary before we can go and discuss things. Really, we have to learn how to differentiate the meaning of different things, so that we can form our own internalized new frame of reference, one that we formed ourselves, independent of these pains of the past and also the fears of the future that add to it. So whatever is not based on the pain of the past gets filled up with the fear of the future. So that's what unconsciously drives us, and self-mastery is really determining, taking charge of that, so that we know what drives us, so that we feel our purpose, so that we have this inner knowing. We don't need to have a map that tells us exactly how to get from here to there. It's not even important. We might not get there in this lifetime. It's not important. But undoing our karma and these energetic attachments that can come through error perceptions and the inability to discern truth, that's really what sets us up for repeat. Okay, it sets us up for failure. So that's why this ability to pierce through all this, due to the power of consciousness, is such a wonderful technology, really, and it sits there dormant in us. And all we need to do is discover it, and then work with it, integrate it, use it for healing, use it for manifestation, so that we can decide whom we want to act as. And that then brings in a whole new level of integrity, a whole new level of empathy, a whole new level of freedom and love, and ultimately inner peace, because there is no confliction anymore when we are more congruent and authentic about this. So let's go into the systematic part here. I know you guys have heard me say this many, many times: past self, present self, future self, ego self, etheric self, higher self, all these different dimensions of self that I introduced to you guys here at the beginning. Let's take this apart. Okay, you see there's a bit of a hierarchy here, so they're not randomly placed there. They do all link together, and let's investigate them together. So what is our past self? I think that one is an easy one to understand. It's the recording of all my experiences, thoughts, emotions, actions, states, dreams, and perceptions in the past. That's understandable, right? But it is really just a recording of it, okay? It's not really an identity, okay? It is just, you know, how we recall the past. And as you probably found out already, a lot of that is narrative and story. So we can't even be sure, really, because there's so many different components, including, you know, what other people tell us and how we saw ourselves through the eyes of others. So this past self is just a recording, a certain recording of that. Okay. Present self is the conscious inner experience of the now. Okay, we talked about present moment awareness. That means right now, this moment, if you take just one big deep breath, you can feel your body, you can feel yourselves, and you can state that you are here in the present now. When I am in the present, I might still be influenced, but no longer controlled by the pain of the past or the fear of the future. So what do I mean with this? When I'm here, when I'm stating that I'm here, I'm really focusing on how I'm feeling right now. And the pain of the past and the fear of the future, they're still somewhere there, but they're not in the foreground. Can you guys feel that? So when you're fully in the now, okay, then the now becomes your focal point. How am I feeling right now? How am I sensing right now? How am I emoting right now? What am I thinking right now? Yeah. So the others are there, but I'm in that moment, I'm not controlled by it. I can recall this recording of the past. Yeah. The events and the narratives, they're there. It's like a book over there on the left, right? And I can open that and, yeah, like a photo album or something. And the fear of the future, yeah, you know, this fuzzy thing, you know, that's also there. It's another book over there. But when I'm choosing to be in the now, they kind of dissipate. The weight of the past and the future dissipates. So what is the authentic self then? The authentic self is the inner recognition of my emotions, thoughts, conditions, also my competencies and my skills, and the adequate and genuine expression of that. So we've learned a little bit about this already here with drive and motivation. Okay, it's the authentic self. We all know this is, you know, something that is genuine, that is the way it is, right? That's we in English we often call this real. You know, when we're real. When I'm authentic, I experience no inner conflict about who I am, but can often experience outer conflicts. Authenticity relates to the naturalness of being, but it's not always true, but it doesn't matter. It feels natural for us though. So you see here now, it begins to get a little fuzzy because we can perceive ourselves as authentic, as real, but others might disagree with that. Yeah, so we experience no inner conflict at that very moment, okay, but we can have outer conflicts with that, which is also the reason why we often choose not to be authentic, because most people in our lives, or you know, work lives, and you know, for people who haven't really changed their circumstances, authenticity is not actually wanted. So there can be confliction with the outside. Here, a question that I want to state to you in regards to authenticity. How does a person's integrity level play into this? So let's say, take a person who is mean, perhaps even by all means, someone who could be classified or labeled as a sociopath. What do you guys think the authenticity level of someone who's mean? Okay, mean, whatever you perceive as mean, but or dark or evil. How do you think this person perceives him or herself from the inside? Probably authentic, Justine. Yeah, and yes, you're correct. Yeah. They probably think they're real. Yeah, and you know what? They're often very real. And there's this shock sometimes that we have with people who are so mean, and we can't believe how mean they are. But they seem to have so much power. They seem to, be able to get everything they want. Yeah, and Cheryl, yeah, you're right. You're looking for a cause here. Why somebody's. We weren't really talking about that. What led to the person being mean, Yeah, and often there's a sort of dysfunction or a mental illness underneath that. And we like say the absence of empathy, so the absence actually of feeling things from the other perspective. But we weren't looking at this here right now. You guys are all right. It's someone who is mean and wants to be mean. Okay, is very authentic. They don't just think they're authentic; they are authentic. Now, if they have a mental illness, okay, that doesn't allow them to have sort of all, say, human brain functions intact, well, then that's an illness. That's different. But what somebody picks, okay, as their inner compass is irrelevant when it comes to authenticity. Authenticity just describes, how real a person is to themselves. And if somebody feels that this is the right thing, if somebody feels that, killing other people in the name of God or for resources or whatever is the right thing, and they do it, then they feel absolutely righteous. They feel like this is their authentic self. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yes, Sheila, can you talk about this here real quick? It's too much for me to read and reiterate.
Oh
You're
yeah,
bringing in
sure.
an interesting point.
Yes, it's as you're talking more about this, because I kept thinking authentic and like integrity and that connection, but when you're describing this other part of being authentic, and a lot of people like that, because even if they're very mean or aggressive, I hear that a lot where they say, well, they're just telling you how it is and you're too sensitive. And they actually really like that because I guess maybe they can sense that that person is confident in their own
Mm-hmm.
authenticity. I don't know.
Yeah,
But it's
authenticity leads to confidence, and it gives a person a certain power. Not
mhm.
power over others, but it makes a person more congruent. And when someone is more congruent, more symmetrical, they are more powerful, okay, in regards to like achieving what they want. There's the reason why we talk so much about authenticity, okay? What we forget, okay, is that what we choose, what we have as a frame of reference for authenticity, well, that's in the eye of the beholder, right? It doesn't make a judgment about the person if they're a good or bad person. Authenticity has nothing to do with good or bad. It just describes the inner recognition of that person, of themselves, basically, and the real expression of that. That's it. Now, whether you have people, that have an agenda with it and a certain kind of motivation, that's the discernment of truth, okay, that is needed to determine that. But in general, people perceive authentic people as sort of more confident. And inauthenticity or fakeness, you know, is ultimately something that leads to a weaker energy. Okay, whether it makes us weak in regards to how we perceive ourselves or how others perceive us, doesn't matter. But authenticity is a benchmark to measure how congruent you are with your own beliefs. That's really it. Understand that, okay? Because this isn't the same as good and bad. A lot of people mistake that. So what's then the ego self, right? Because that comes next. I've mentioned something like fake self, okay? Fake self is not necessarily the same as an ego self. Okay, the ego self is the bias of how I see myself that was formed through all the interpretations and narratives of how I have or how I am perceiving or judging myself. So ego self has something to do with the past and how I judge that. Okay, it represents the aspect of myself that has learned through coping with negative experiences. So that's why I often call ego as the culmination of all our coping mechanisms. Ego is a mechanism that is designed to allow me to survive physically, emotionally, and mentally when inner and outer conflicts become too great for me to deal with authentically. So when I have a situation where this trauma is obvious, you know, when there's a real life or death situation that requires me to cope because I have no concept for that, you know, like what do I do if somebody holds a gun to my head? Okay, we don't think about these kind of things. So when they actually happen to us, all right, then ego takes over. It's a very important function of our psyche. Okay, if we start thinking too much, then we're already dead. You know, you guys understand what I'm saying, right? There are situations in life where we have to react in a split second, and that's it's the department of our ego self. But it's also the place where all the copings from the past get stored. Okay, and that's why we run into issues with our ego, because when I'm in my ego self, I experience high levels of inner stress and conflict, which I'm typically not aware of. Being in my ego self can be regarded as an unconscious state in which my past determines my experience in the present. It's very important to realize. Ego is neither good nor bad. It's just extremely limited. Any comments or thoughts that you have about this? All right, then let's move on here to the present self. Present self is the conscious inner experience of the now. So we've practiced this earlier. When I'm in the present, I might still be influenced, but no longer, we've already talked about it, no longer controlled by the pain of the past or the fear of the future. You experience that yourself. Well, what's the true self? Okay, so we had ego self as the restricted state of ourself based on the past. Well, the true self is the conscious state in which the unchanging aspect of myself finds expression through my authenticity. It forms through self-awareness and connection with my true needs, true wants, and aspirations, as well as the trust in my inner guidance that can lead me past the limitations of my unconscious beliefs about myself, including my ego self. So the true self now brings in a quality. It facilitates authenticity, but it is not the same as authenticity. There's a higher quality to that. There's a consciousness component in that, and that allows me to be self-aware, to have this connection with my true needs, true wants, and true aspirations. So if we look at a sociopath, for instance, or someone who's really mean, then we find that they can be very authentic, okay, but they're not always really in touch with their true needs, true wants, and true beliefs, because it's still unconscious. The true self is very, very conscious, and it can see through the ego self. When I am true to myself, I am typically very calm, sure and clear about myself. However, I might experience conflicts with other aspects of myself. But this is now getting interesting. So when I'm in my true self, I'm experiencing something like an inner calm or inner knowing, as Cheryl described it earlier. But there can still be conflicts, and we call them schisms in here in the context of self-healing, with other aspects of myself, with my ego self, with my false self, with my past self. So being a true self is a conscious choice. It is the prerequisite for discerning truth. Yeah. So it's literally a place where you see and feel all these aspects of yourself, but where you choose the part in you that is unchanging, that is without conflicts, even though you feel that there are still conflicts in you. Who of you knows what I'm talking about? When you're in your true self, you can still feel your ego self, your false self. There's a sort of gravitation towards that. You know, you want to be different, or you want to see yourself different, or you want other people to see yourself differently, or you're afraid of how other people see you, or you're afraid other people would see your true self, or you think that your true self is weak. Okay, you feel the need to protect it. All different kinds of conflicts that can still be there, but this conscious state that can supersede everything, and also the inner schisms, if you consciously choose to be a true self, to be really true with yourself. And that includes authenticity, that includes you being aware of your ego self, of your false self. So the false self, that's the part in us that basically plays a role. Okay, that's the unconscious inner experience of the now. It makes us try to be someone we are not. Okay. Yes, and often that's conditioned. You mentioned pleasing earlier. You mentioned, sort of trying to be good, or whatever we think good is, trying to be more appealing to others, and so forth. Okay, so that's the false self, is basically sort of the fake self that I mentioned earlier, the part of you where you play a role. And if you pay attention, you can actually feel this. Okay, the conscious self is when you consciously witness yourself as who you are. Conscious self is a conscious witnessing of who I am, who I show up as, and who I want to experience life as. When I'm a conscious self, I am becoming aware of my inner fragmentation and confliction. I can feel and discern truth, and I am aware when I am conscious and when I am unconscious. This is subject to many other trainings that we've had. When do I know that I'm a conscious self? The answer is when you proclaim yourself as a conscious self. So at the moment that you are making yourself conscious to yourself is the moment that you're conscious. The spiritual self is the conscious inner experience of the presence of a higher consciousness within and around me. It redefines reality into 3D and etheric reality. So you begin to see that there are not just different versions of reality, but that there are indeed different dimensions of reality. Okay, and that in this higher or larger perspective of reality, that there's more. There's more. There's more that exists, more than I can see, often also called the unseen, or the ether. My spiritual self shows me ego, false self, true, and etheric self as momentary expressions of my energetic state. That's something we discussed in part 1, how our energetic state determines our perception. When I am aware of my spiritual self, I can recognize the unseen aspects of myself, such as karmic, shadow, trauma, and etheric self. I begin to see the world with different eyes and recognize the power and authority of my sacred self. What's the future self? It's the conscious inner experience of the presence of meaning and purpose through me. My future self is constantly changing based on the energetic quality of my choices. It guides me to the highest expression as an inner compass, whether I'm aware of it or not. But it's still determined by the quality of the choices that we make, guys. That's very important. So if our alignment, if our drive is the fear of lack or the fear of pain or the fear of loss, or then our choices, they have a very low energy, and therefore our future self also has to manifest into a lower potential. When our choices are based on higher vibratory goals, such as true empathy, true love, true healing, peace and joy and beauty, then our choices become different, and with it then also our potential, and with it then also this manifestation as our future self. When I am aware of my future self, I can contextualize all experiences in the past and present as learning experiences, leading me to my future self. That's where the concepts of syntropy and retrocausality come in. Cheryl mentioned something earlier. So there is, if you pay attention, it's really what comes with the awareness level, then there is a pull towards your higher potential. There's a pull towards the highest vibratory outcome in you. But, our error perceptions, through our fragmentation, through our egos, the coping that comes with that, of false self, and so forth, really limits this outlook, limits the options, limits the choices that we have, and therefore our choices are often lower than they could be, lower in energy, lower in vibratory energy. The etheric self is the conscious inner experience of the multidimensional, the unseen aspects of myself, seen as energetic mirror self, or dream self, as it's sometimes called, or lunar self, which reflects my energetic state, motivation, habits, intentions, and conflicts stored in my subconscious, as well as my energy body without judgment. It just is there. That's why energy healing is so cool, because you see things the way they are. And you can often also see why a person does that and what has led to it, but there's no judgment in that. So it's more true what you see there in that regards than what the person presents on the outside in the 3D, because that's often filtered. There's all these stories and narratives and the false selves and the projection and so forth that filters how we present ourselves, who we choose to be, is often not authentic, not congruent, and not true. And the etheric, you can see it though. When I'm aware of my etheric self, I can see or feel energies as part of my reality, which allows me to recognize the fragmentation and schisms of disconnection in myself and others. Yeah, so I just described how you can observe this and for others, but you can of course also observe this for yourself then. And this is why we train etheric perception, because that helps a person to bypass some of these blocks and error perceptions that can be formed through trauma and fragmentation, and it allows us to work with these parts directly without re-traumatizing the person. Soul self is the conscious inner experience of my soul purpose beyond its incarnation, beyond my 3D dimension here. When I'm aware of my soul self, I know who I am and I know why I'm here. It communicates with me through my true self, which serves as the mediator between 3D ego self and soul self. My higher self is the conscious embodiment and higher expression of myself. It unites all aspects and dimensions of myself. It is the perfect and fulfilled promise to become an embodied soul self, not just here in this dimension. Okay. And then the divine self, that's not even in this overview here, is the conscious inner experience of divine consciousness acting through me as me. I have surrendered all aspects of my ego self. In fact, all aspects of self, and are therefore no longer conflicted in any dimension or time. When I'm aware of my infinite and eternal divine self, I know that I am. That I am neither the cause nor the product, the consequence of reality. I become the conscious co-creator of my reality and live in a continual state of inner peace. There's a complete absence of energetic stress at that place. So coming back here, looking at all of this, you can see this now. So our authentic self, really is the first step to become more authentic, and that has to do with self-awareness. And what we're up against there is the false self, and that's often formed through the past self. Then the next step is to learn to become more true with ourselves, okay, and to bypass, all these narratives, okay, and that then allows us to really become a conscious self, okay, and in that conscious self state, also in the true self, so we're up against the ego self. And that's why we often, work with the present self here as the pathway, okay, to become more conscious. The true self, by the way, is always there. It's just that we can't really hear it because there's so many other loud noises in our heads, like this critical inner voice and all the false stuff and the ego stuff, that we can't hear it. But when we're present, when we're conscious self, we can hear our true self inner guidance. The spiritual self is basically, what we then work with here in energy work is when we really perceive ourselves as, not just a 3D body anymore. And it allows us to train etheric perception and to gain a clearer picture of what this etheric self really is. A lot of people are afraid of that. Mostly because they are still living in a state of false self and ego self for the most part, because then there's a hiding or a suppression of something involved, and that's why we're afraid of really seeing things the absolute, in the absolute true way. But it allows us also to peek into our future self, to connect with our future self, and to feel that pull into our highest potential. And then obviously the soul self state, that then also connects us to the divine self, but that's even higher up here. Is the place where we know why we're here, we know who we are, and we're consciously choosing who we want to be. Okay, and this is what this journey is really about. This is what we're seeking ultimately, but we need to understand that that's not really anything we need to find, okay, because it's already there. It's always there. We need to let go of all the other stuff that blocks that, okay? And that's where here keyword energetic stress is the part that's in the way. Energetic stress indicates higher levels of inner conflict, often between all these different versions of ourselves, as a result of conditioning, exposure, and unconscious beliefs, often in conjunction with unconscious emotional and energetic projection and absorption. Here, a quick gauge. You see this often in the workbook or in the trainings of the Sacred Self-Healing program, that really shows us where we're at energetically when these are the things that drive us. When we are in, these states here, or engage in these activities, it shows us basically the intensity level of our inner confliction, of our energetic stress. So seeking, for instance, here is a relatively stressed state. Okay, stress begins to become less, and we experience this all as this relaxation and this calming and this sort of serenity that we experience when we really go into our truth. And then these states here, inner connection, congruence and clarity, creativity and vision, healing, non-resistance, knowingness and trust, they then come through this conscious experience of our spiritual self, and then later of our soul self, and it aligns us to our heart's presence. Yeah, it can lead to this really peaceful, serene inner place. And self-healing is obviously learning how to do this consciously and understanding that it's a continual process of managing our energy, our empathy, and our responses, and with it also our state of being. Without the ability to discern truth, there's no self-healing possible. You hear me say liars can't heal. That is not a judgment. That is just something that helps us to realize that if we're not in truth with ourselves, self-healing really isn't possible. It is to the degree that we can, of course, and this is what you learn in energy coaching, when you learn here in the Sacred Self-Healing Program, gradually increase your energetic state. And that's what these 24 steps are there for, to help you do that, to give you a roadmap on how to do that. There's something here that I want to share with you. This is a subject of a whole other training, but you know, using sort of a self-aware gauging within yourself, you know, where you make this part of your practice when you meditate, when you contemplate, when you go in the self-reflective place, of how much truth you have in your life, how much love you have in your life, how much light, you know, how much congruence you have in your life right now. So truth would express through inner connection, love would express through the self-care, the self-love that you express, and light expresses through the authenticity, the congruence, and the expression of that. Okay, and that's something you can do literally whenever you want to. You'd be surprised when you ask your inner system, your energy system, to tell you that, to give you like something, a number from 0 to 10. Okay, some of you will maybe see this as a gauge in a visual way, and some of you will get numbers, and some of you will just sort of have a feeling for that. But that allows you to tap into the higher levels of self-awareness. It can measure it for you. So self-mastery then is the ability to self-control and self-regulate my own energy regardless of outer influences. It enables me to act according to my conscious intention against inner and outer impulses. It allows me to consciously steer my future to one of my choosing. Self-mastery requires me to have a clear vision of myself. And that's what all this here was about. Dimensions of self. We investigated all the different dimensions, and it ultimately comes to something very simple. Namely, how aware are we? How truthful are we? And how much do we allow ourselves to see ourselves with a loving eye? So the journey of becoming my higher self then means recognizing the power of self-responsibility, and with it, as a reward, so to speak, the sovereignty of consciously choosing who I want to experience this life as. Thank you guys for sharing. I know it always gets a little heavy at the end because it's there's so much going on. Just real quick, guys, does anybody want to share spontaneously what your takeaway is? What are you taking home from this talk, this discussion, this training, this workshop? Yeah, Sheila, for you, it's really the authenticity definition. Brian, for you, it's paying more attention to how you are perceiving yourself is really, really important. Yes, because there's so much expressed in that, how we perceive ourselves, and also how many error perceptions or narratives or unconscious beliefs. I mean, this is so convoluted, guys. By paying more attention to how we perceive ourselves, we are making an extremely important step into authenticity, becoming more real with ourselves. Because even if we come to the conclusion that most of the things or most of the ways that we see ourselves is not even true, it doesn't matter, but the awareness of that changes things. Yeah, and Julian, thank you for adding that part, that we are much more than we can imagine. And that is absolutely true. And that is the part here that I really want to transport to you, is that there is so much to discover. It's for anyone who is curious and who has the willingness to really discover this. It's not about perfection. It's not about getting somewhere or ascending. It's not about this. This is just about really exploring these really, really wonderful worlds that open up when we change our perception. Cheryl's sharing that she has a better understanding of the different aspects of selves now. Yeah. Yeah, you know, by listening to it more often, anything that you can listen to that has this higher quality, this higher vibrational quality to it, that brings in a higher levels of consciousness is good. You don't have to memorize all these definitions. That is cognitive. That is not really what's going to help you to integrate it, but to become more aware of it, you know, to use these tools that you're learning here, and you know, that we're practicing in these Skype meditations every day, and sharing in energy sessions, in reading and educating ourselves. All that is part of integration. Yeah, just don't get hung up on all these different terms here, and that you have to know them all. Just feel them and understand them from within. That's enough. Then you can just, you know, do this on the fly. You know, if somebody asks you, well, what's the false self? Okay, you just need to understand what it feels like inside of you, and then you can describe it. You don't need to go by my definition or Plato's definition or Carl Jung's definition. Form your own words, guys. Form your own expressions. Form your own version of this. This is, you know, when you really bring yourself into your higher expression, that's when you have your own vocabulary for things. Yeah, thank you, Sheila. You appreciate the discussion about how many selves there are. And you know, once you get that there are so many different versions of reality and so many different versions of selves, you also understand why we all are so fragmented. Okay, if we're not aware of all of this, guys, there is a whole microcosm of stuff going on inside of us. And the coolest part about this self-discovery journey is that it allows us to experience our own higher self from within. Okay, nobody can tell you who you are, what your true self is, what your higher self is. What? Don't listen to this. It's a red flag. If somebody tells you that, okay, then it's an immediate no go. Okay, the only way to really grow into your true, authentic, sacred soul self, okay, is through your inner experience and nothing else. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you for making this a wonderful experience for me as well. It's very, very enjoyable. And yeah, I hope to see you guys soon. There is the opportunity for you to comment in the Sacred Self-Healing Forum, where I post the recordings. You get an email with the recording, but you also can always go back to the forum and watch it there again, and also comment and discuss amongst another. Thank you so much.